Hello and welcome. Look around you for a second. Think about American history. We talk so much about the wars that defined us, right? The big ones, the Revolution, the Civil War, World War II. They feel like the pillars holding up our national story. But what if I told you that the United States has actually fought over 100 wars since 1775? 100. That's staggering. It means for every famous victory we celebrate, there are dozens of struggles that have just disappeared. They have no special holidays, no big school assemblies. They're just historical whispers. Today, we're stepping into the shadows of those footnotes. We're going to look directly at the real people and the real pain behind the conflicts that history decided to leave behind. We need to ask ourselves, why do we forget? And what is the actual human price of that forgetting? We're searching for an answer to a profound question. What truly is the most forgotten war in American history? Let's start with the war that historians often give that specific label, America's Forgotten War. I'm talking about the War of 1812. It sounds like a simple date, but the story is deeply complex. Imagine being President James Madison, the same man we call the father of the Constitution. He inherited a huge problem. At the time, Britain and France, our main trading partners, were tearing Europe apart, and America was caught right in the middle. The British Navy decided to solve its manpower shortage with a horrifying practice called impressment. They would simply seize American merchant sailors and force them into British military service. We're not talking about a few people. Sources estimate that as many as 6,000 Americans were snatched from their ships. Doesn't that just sound like kidnapping on a massive scale? At the same time, out west, the British were openly supporting Native American leaders like Tecumseh and his brother the Prophet. They built an alliance to block America's relentless push westward. These two threats, the hijacking of our citizens and the perceived threat on the frontier, finally pushed Madison and a fiery group of young congressmen known as war hawks to act. But not everyone was on board. The war vote was shockingly close, split almost perfectly down party lines. Critics in the Northeast, mostly Federalists, were furious. They mocked it, calling it Mr. Madison's War. The war itself was messy, confusing, and filled with disappointment. Did you know the U.S. failed repeatedly in its attempted invasions of Canada? They were met hard by British forces, Canadian militia, and Native American fighters. But we do remember two iconic moments. First, the humiliation of August 14th, when the British sailed in and set fires right in the capital, Washington, D.C. Thank goodness for Dolly Madison, who rescued that famous portrait of George Washington before the flames reached the White House dining room. The second moment is heartbreaking because of its timing. The peace treaty, the Treaty of Ghent, was tentatively signed in Belgium on December 24, 1814. The war was officially over. But news traveled by boat, slow and agonizingly unreliable. 2 weeks later, on January 8, 1815, unaware that peace was declared, a massive British force attacked American troops in New Orleans. Andrew Jackson led the Americans in a decisive rout, killing nearly 1,000 British troops. Imagine the moment. Americans learned simultaneously that the war was over and that a massive, bloody victory had been won 2 weeks later. A huge sacrifice, made completely in vain. In the end, the war was technically a draw. We didn't stop impressment, but the true tragic consequence fell on the Native American coalition. They lost Tecumseh and the crucial British ally, leaving them exposed to America's unstoppable westward expansion. That loss changed the map of the continent forever. If 1812 is forgotten because it was complex, then the Philippine-American War, 1899 to 1902, is forgotten because it's deeply uncomfortable. It's a conflict that challenges the idea of America as a pure liberator. Think about the feeling of the Filipino people in 1898.
They had just helped the Americans defeat Spain, and they were ready for their freedom. They expected independence. Instead, the Treaty of Paris transferred ownership of the Philippines right to the U.S. They went from one ruler to another. Can you imagine that level of betrayal? In 1899, they didn't hesitate. The First Philippine Republic declared war on America. This wasn't a quick fight. It lasted 3 brutal years. Initially, it was conventional warfare, but the Filipinos quickly switched to a tough, relentless guerrilla campaign. The conflict became a nightmare, marked by extreme brutality on both sides, plus high death rates from disease. For America, the cost was high. Between 4,000 and 6,000 American lives were lost, and 2,800 were wounded. The U.S. began ceding control in 1902, but the Filipinos didn't gain full independence until after World War II. A powerful reminder that sometimes the fight for liberty takes generations. But these aren't the only ones. The early 20th century is littered with brief, violent interventions that sound like they belong in a spy novel, not in our textbooks. Did you know American troops fought in the Russian Civil War? After the Bolsheviks took power in 1917, they made peace with Germany. The U.S. and Allied forces from Britain, France, and Italy sent troops to Russian ports, initially just to stop Germany from grabbing valuable military supplies. But they quickly got sucked into the internal conflict, fighting alongside pro-Tsarist forces against the communists. This was a remote, strange war that accomplished almost nothing strategically. When the Bolsheviks won in 2020, the Allies withdrew, but 400 Americans lost their lives in this confusing mess. Or consider our deep involvement in Central America, often driven by money. Take the U.S. occupation of Nicaragua, 1912 to 1933. In 1912, as chaos erupted between warring factions, Washington sent 500 soldiers. Why? To protect American citizens, but also to secure key railroads and U.S. business interests. We actually managed their financial system for 15 years. When Civil War returned in 1927, another 2,000 troops were deployed. Over 140 Americans were killed over the span of this long, quiet intervention. And we also sent 2,500 troops to China in the Boxer Rebellion in 1900 to help a multinational force rescue 3,500 foreigners under siege in Beijing. Over 100 Americans were killed just in that action. These weren't large-scale mobilization wars, but they cost hundreds of lives. They demonstrate a constant, expensive effort to protect American interests abroad, an effort we rarely talk about. But if we are talking about the most forgotten war, perhaps we must talk about the war we've tried hardest to erase, the one that exposes the uglier truths of our founding. During the Revolutionary War, that fight for freedom we hold so dear, violence wasn't always directed at enemy soldiers. It often spilled over, especially on the frontier. Let's talk about the Gnadenhutten Massacre in Ohio, March 17, 1882. The Moravian Lenape tribe in that area were pacifists. They had converted to a Czech Protestant faith that strictly forbade taking up arms. They tried desperately to stay neutral, living in a terrifying no-man's land between the revolutionary forces and the British. But the revolutionaries were convinced the Moravians were secret spies for the British. In March 1782, a militia force from Pennsylvania arrived. Their first victim was a young man named Joseph Shibash. He was just looking for his horse. He pleaded for his life, saying he was part white and his father was a preacher. It didn't matter. They beat him to death, mutilated him, and scalped him. Then they went to the village. They told the villagers, who were starving, that they were there to help and protect them. The trusting Moravians fed them and gave up their few weapons. It was a complete, agonizing betrayal. The militiamen then rounded up the men, women, and children. They held a vote, an agonizing, twisted vote, on whether to kill them. Out of 160 men, only 18 voted against the killing. The bound Moravians spent their last night together, simply praying and singing hymns, asking only for time to prepare for death. When the sun rose on March 8, 1882, the massacre began. The frontiersmen used mallets, hatchets, and knives to bludgeon and scalp their victims. Men, women, and 39 children were murdered indiscriminately. Accounts recall the dreadful work of human slaughter continued until every prayer and moan and sigh was hushed in the stillness of death. They were killed simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the terrifying vortex of a war they refused to join.
This violence, incidents like Gnadenhutten, continued to fuel frontier wars for years after the revolution supposedly ended. Yet we hold up George Washington and Alexander Hamilton as the centerpiece of our memory. Why are these massacres relegated to footnotes? It's because history can feel too big, too difficult. We prefer the comforting fables. We like the simple story of heroes and villains. But the birth of the United States can only truly be understood when we look at all of it, including the ugly, expensive lessons. Because for the families of those who died in the bloody draw of 1812, in the difficult fight for empire in the Philippines, or in the terrifying silence of Gnadenhutten, those wars are not forgotten. They are the most remembered events in their lives. We owe it to them and to ourselves to stop labeling these struggles as mere footnotes. They are part of who we are. By remembering, we honor the truth, and maybe, just maybe, we can ensure these dark mistakes are never made again. If you think this video is very informative, then like and subscribe.